Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the SOM TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's episode, we have changed a bit of our programming because of an event that nobody expected, nobody wanted. A legend, an absolute, maybe the person that inspired legends in Napa Valley, Warren Winiarski, has passed away. He is the man who made the red wine that won the Judgment of Paris at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, and he is the inspiration of so many successive generations. I have Steve Matthiasson of Matthiasson Vineyards on the podcast to talk about what he meant to the wine industry and what he will mean going through the wine business from now on. Steve, thank you for joining. I really appreciate this. It's been incredible to sort of see the outpouring of respect for this man. I know that he was a mentor to you. I know he was somebody who was incredibly important. Let me just start by asking you, who was Warren? How do you define who this person was?
How would I define Warren? I would describe him as a teacher, a philosopher, a craftsperson, an aesthetic, and a striver for truth and beauty and values that are fundamental to being human, that we often don't prioritize or dismiss. Or he was a striver for elevation of himself and people in his sphere.
I know this is tough for you because I know how close he was to you. I mean, we spent several years. We have a series coming about the Judgment of Paris. We've been trying to tell this story properly, one that is grounded in reality, but also gives the weight to what the event actually became. I couldn't believe he would say yes as fast as he did to us, in his 90s. And we ended up filming extensively with him. And I have to say, in the latter part of his years, he became, like you said, a teacher. Like, he became somebody who guided us in how to do it, and not how to tell the story, but more just to make sure that we're understanding how this event unfolded. I don't know. I don't know how to place him as a person in wine, because he seems to be so much bigger. And if you see the outpouring on social media and with others who knew him, he doesn't seem like any other winemaker I've ever met. There's no personality like him. Before we get to your relationship with Warren Winiarski, what did Warren do? I mean, what is the reason that everybody is so emotional about his passing? I mean, it's not unusual for someone in their late 90s to pass away.
I mean, part of the reason, in the long time that he was a member of our winemaking community, there's just a ton of people that came through Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. The list of everyone that has worked at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars is the who's who. It's very much a who's who of the wine industry. And every single person that I personally know that passed through there over the years was profoundly influenced by him. And in a lot of cases, I mean, in many cases, he was a tough SOB. And so people are, they remember how tough he was. He was tough. But everyone knows that he held to a standard that every single person that has passed through there carries with them. I mean, even people that were closer to him in age, there was a certain father figure-y kind of thing that he just held you to standard that you kind of carry with you after when you're exposed to a person like that in your life. That you can't go back from that, because before it didn't matter and now it matters. And that's so valuable to have that. A lot of times that when you're there getting in the standard stamped on you, that not the standard, because but the idea of trying to be excellent is hard at the time. It's hard work. It's like no one likes in basic training or something like that. It's like it's hard. But then when it's done, you value that. You value that you had that experience. So a lot of the outpouring then is this sense of loss of this figure that held to a standard isn't with us anymore. So the world now is a little bit more adrift. It's not as firm and pointed in the right direction, and that's a loss. That's just that I think hits you. We just lost someone that was trying to
seek perfection, kind of a thing. I mean,
who wanted wine to be something great and something lofty, and there's so much cynicism within any industry, including wine. And Warren didn't carry cynicism. The complexity of who he was did not include cynicism. And so there's something about that makes you feel, to answer your question, that we've lost a little bit of a beacon or a lighthouse that he represented.
Well, he's known. I mean, obviously, we should state, he made the red wine that won the Judgment of Paris, that Stephen Spurrier and Patricia Gallagher put on. When I talked to him and I mentioned the Judgment of Paris, he was very happy about the marketing of that event. He said, that event made me money.
Yeah.
But that event made it so I could farm better property and more land, and I could farm better. I will never forget this. He didn't say the way people talk about the Judgment of Paris. His thing was, I got to farm better than I could before that event, which is a fascinating thing. Tell me about his background, because he's not a traditional guy. When you think of a farmer or a winemaker, I mean, Steve, you went to school, you love agriculture. What did Warren go to school for?
He went to school for political philosophy. He was literally a philosopher because he could speak Latin. He was the classics. It was Plato and Aristotle and Nietzsche and most intelligent person I've ever met. But he studied philosophy and was an instructor of philosophy and ended up falling in love with wine and with the idea of being a farmer. That was his, he came here to California with the dream of being a farmer, packed up his kids, left the university. They just packed everything they could own in their car and they came out. I mean, I remember one of his kids said that when they all their stuff was in the car. So just getting over the Rockies in Colorado, the kids had to get out and walk because it was too heavy to it was overheating getting up the hill. I mean, that's what it was for them getting out here. And he managed to just get a job and start learning how to make wine. It was not dissimilar to what we have now in California with young winemakers, lease a vineyard somewhere in Napa or the foothills or Santa Barbara or Mendocino and get a job as an assistant winemaker somewhere and scrape it together and buy a little bit of grapes or something. I mean, that's how he got started.
Did he ever talk to you about the Judgment of Paris? We interviewed him extensively. And I think personally for me, and I know a lot of people listening are like, when the hell is this thing coming out? I promise all of you, it's in edit right now. It is coming. But the Judgment of Paris is more fascinating, not because the Americans won. It's more fascinating because of the personalities that were involved in it. You had the Barretts, who were this certain kind of personality up here. You have Warren Winiarski, who was this true brain philosophy. He was a guy who would be a very hard teacher in a lecture hall.
Oh my
God. Then you had, very hard. And then you had, the French guys over at Côte d'Ivoire, and then you have all the people on the other side of the pond who were just used to generations of doing what they were doing. I don't think this can be overstated. The reason that red won had to do with an attention to detail that I don't think American wine had ever seen before. Had ever seen somebody who approached wine in an analytical way as this. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not like this. That's not your, I know you to be somebody who you are very close to the vines. I mean, you know more about mites than anyone else I could call up on the phone. But also, you're somebody you're in love with the poetry of wine. And I think that Warren found the poetry a little later. He found the analysis of wine earlier. And I think you're finding the analysis, the craftsmanship. Okay, is that the right term? Yeah. Okay.
I think, yeah.
What I want to do is I want to cut to a clip from our interview, one of our many interviews with Warren, about his thoughts on the Judgment of Paris and what it actually did for California and for him.
For the world of winemaking, it liberated us from an artificial hierarchy that had been long-standing, that there was the wines of France from particular regions had achieved such a preeminence. That hierarchy precluded people from dreaming, from aspiring as far as they could, as they rightfully should have made the expression of the beauty of the grapes in their region their highest goal. And it liberated, it broke that hierarchy.
It's funny to think of him talking about a hierarchy with wine, and I think that it's easy to think of the Judgment of Paris as breaking a so-called hierarchy. I don't know that he's talking about that we beat the French hierarchy-wise. I think he's meaning that the vernacular was broken. Anybody could make wine.
Yes,
it was sort
that's
of
exactly right.
What is your experience like? How did he describe to you the Judgment of Paris and his involvement in it?
Just to follow up on your point really quick, because that was fundamental to the way he approached wine. That's what I mean by a standard. this is about human potential. That if you apply yourself and you try hard and you understand and you have the discipline to take the time to study your craft and you focus on the details, it doesn't matter how you were born, what your last name is, where you live, what your privilege or your resources, you have the right to take a stab at it and try to do this. And that was fundamental to his approach and why he wanted everyone to be better. How do you try harder? But the Judgment in Paris, it's interesting, like he was really proud of it. I mean, he was just really proud of it because what the wine did such an important thing by showing that some upstart in Napa can do something. And so therefore an upstart in Colorado or in Maryland or in Languedoc or anywhere else could do it, that his wine was the wine that did it. I mean, he was proud of that, to have a contribution and an impact into the wine world for sure. But also something interesting when you said about business, because like I remember one time I asked him early on in our winery, I said, "What is, do you have any advice on, how do you build a wine business?" And he says, identify a great piece of land, farm it really well, really focus on the details, do an excellent job in the winery, story tell really well, and winning the Judgment in Paris doesn't hurt.
Yeah, winning the Judgment in Paris does not hurt.
Yeah, a little luck helps too, right? So you have to make your own lucky because you can't back off, but a little bit of luck doesn't hurt either.
I mean, Steve, you know better than anyone that when you work your ass off all day and you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about work, eventually you get a win. You know this.
Yeah,
It's like wins do not come for people who are like, yeah, I'll just go to the movies right now. It's going to work out. Wins come for people who they got dirt under their fingernails. I mean, it's tough. Mm-hmm. It's very tough. How did you meet him? Why are you on this podcast? Like, why are you the person talking about him?
So I have my other world is vineyard consulting, right? And I have my partner, Garrett Buckland. We've been working together on Premier Viticultural Services since 2002. It's crazy. And he hired us to be his consultant back in 2006. And it was a kind of heavy duty at that point because we actually really needed that client really badly because we'd lost our other big client because it had gotten merged in with another place. So it was a 2.5 day a week gig. So I had an office at Sag's Wine Cellars and met with Warren 3-4 times a week for several years, and was there. Like, part of my job was to try to memorialize his experience of all of the different vineyard blocks and the wines from the vineyard blocks because he was preparing to sell the winery. He wanted to make sure that his legacy was there and that the new people could have the benefit of all of his experience. And so I put a ton of work into sort of like memorializing all of that and getting all this information together. So we worked really intensely on that. And then at the last minute when he was selling the winery, he decided he wanted to keep one of his vineyards because he decided he wasn't ready to stop farming. And so he kept his Arcadia vineyard, which is in Coombsville. And it's a big vineyard. It's like 80 acres, more or less, planted. At this point, I think 2008, if I'm not mistaken, is when he sold the winery. So now he just poured all of his passion and interest and curiosity into that vineyard. We had our weekly standing meeting on top of all the ad hoc meetings, and we just sat there and dug into that vineyard, and he was always also wanting to any other consultant that was out there, he wanted to hire them too and get another opinion. But I was sort of his core guy at that time, and so I would interface with everybody. So like he hired Greg LaFollette one time to help with tannins, or he was always interested in tannins, or he hired Lucy Morton came out, or Danny Schuster, who works on like Ornellaia and all this. He's more European, but he's based in New Zealand. He would come over and or to work with, like with Wine X-Ray. And we're always, because he didn't like the tannins, and he was just so curious and just relentless at trying to understand how to make better grapes. A lot of times it'd be like crazy frustrating because he was really intense about it. And so like Sunday morning, getting calls on my phone, like as he's out walking the vineyard and he's really upset because it wasn't done right to what we talked about, and the wine's not going to be any good.
We have a clip coming up about his thoughts on perfection, but what do you mean? How does he notice you're doing a bad job just by walking through the vineyard? Like, what is it that he's seeing?
Because we had meetings about how to, you're constantly doing all these activities throughout the whole year, right? Because we have to do the shoot thinning. Well, shoot thinning, we might say, well, we're going to leave the shoots, all these shoots, this is one example. All the shoots grow after you prune in the spring, like your vines are like chia pets, and you have to thin all the shoots out except for the ones that you meant to leave when you were pruning. That's one of the jobs. You can just do it simple like that, not think about it. But if with Warren, you're going to think about it. And he wants to know from you, how can you do it better? And he is going to then challenge you on that. You have to be able to defend why you think that it's better. And then once he's convinced, he wants to do it. And then he's going to come on a Sunday morning and he's going to see a vine mixed in some huge vineyard that it wasn't done right. And that raises all kind of questions, because how was the supervision conducted? I mean, did they understand how important this task was? You told me this was important, and I found this vine that wasn't done this way. And so we can't let this go, because if this could happen again on the next activity, and there's a process problem now because the guys aren't getting adequately trained so that they understand why they're doing the job. They're not doing it rote. And I remember on one time he was really mad at me. And I say, Warren, I don't understand. I explained it really thoroughly to them. And he says, Steve, you told them it was an island. You neglected to inform them that the island was surrounded by water. And it took me like 5 years to figure out what the hell he meant by that. But then I was like, all of a sudden I was like, it's genius, because you and I happen to know that islands are surrounded by water by definition. It's an island, but you can't assume anything. If you are trying to make great wine and there's a crew there, that your job is to educate the crew on not just how to do the job, but why it's important and how to handle what they're going to encounter when they're doing the work. And so part of that means making sure that they understand that islands have water all the way around, though, on all sides. It's not assuming that they really understand what an island is. And so it's just, I mean, he said, like, if he couldn't get a hold of me on a Sunday, he'd call Jill on her phone.
Your wife, yeah.
Yeah. So we worked, it was really intense for a number of years. And then Garrett kind of took over as I got just too busy with Matthiasson to be like the daily guy. And Garrett took over as the daily guy. And I became more the consigliere and kind of, friend. And, he would, call me to see what's going on or bounce or, because some of his other stuff, like the stuff he was funding at UC Davis and that sort of thing, he really relied on me to sort of help him make these things successful, because he'd get really concerned and he'd want me to do some digging or some talking, or just, are they using my money properly, or do they really understand what we're trying to do here? I'm not trying to find research, but I'm trying to find information that will help people make more beautiful wine. And is that happening? He wanted wine to be beautiful. He thought wine had the ability to be beautiful, so a big part of for his legacy and why he would teach people, but also why he was funding a lot of stuff was to try to, because he really wanted people to be able to make beautiful wine. And part of his legacy was to try to leave some tools for people so that they could do that.
Let's hear from Warren in his own words on perfection and the pursuit of perfection in wine. I think that there's nobody like this guy.
If you have the ability to help something get to a perfection which it naturally embodies, and you don't exercise it, there's something wrong with what you're doing. And you ought to think about maybe going into another line of business.
Does that bring back a little PTSD for you there, Steve?
Yeah. But I love it. That's why we got along, because I'm with you. We're not trying to make a commodity here. We're trying to do something special. That's why it was so exciting.
I just feel like it's so rare. And my field is, my particular field is very strange. It's very hard to make money doing what we do. There's an elixir to what we do that is totally up to the audience. Mm-hmm. And I think wine is very similar. It's hard to put a point on why it works sometimes. You worked your ass off, you did everything right, and people just might not like it, or the trends are just not in your favor. It's just how art kind of goes. And that's the place that wine is an art. I just think about kind of like the fact that somebody like Warren gets to be as good at his job as he was. He reminds me of a lot of coaches that I had in high school, like football coaches or wrestling coaches or baseball or tennis coaches. Somebody who just, there is no, winning is the only outcome. You have to win. For Warren, I just wonder if, this is a tough question, and I hope, do people get to exist like Warren anymore? I mean, do you get to have personalities like this where it's like, the end justifies the means, but along the way, I'm teaching you? Because I feel like people are more sensitive now. It's like, I don't mean to get into a conversation about that. You know what I'm talking about, but like, does Warren get to exist in his prime today? Is this personality still around?
Yeah, I think so. I think in wine, I mean, chefs, for example, for sure, right? I can think of some personalities in the wine world, but
you can name names. It's totally fine.
How that, you know, like Ted Lemon would be an example of like,
Ted, yeah.
You know, someone who is solely focused on excellence, right?
But Ted is a sweet guy. I don't like Warren is a guy that in his 90s, I'd push him one direction and he would turn to me and go, you really want, you want, and he was like, you know, like Wolverine in the comic books, his claws would come out. He'd be like, you want to go there? And, I mean, he was a guy who was not afraid to be honest. And there was a full-blown thesis to back up his opinion. He was never a guy that he wouldn't fly off the handle. He wasn't like an emotional guy. He always had a reason for why he was going a direction. And that's different than, you know, I mean, Ted Lemon's I've known Ted for a long time. He's such a sweet guy. Now he does achieve perfection. I mean, you're in this category
strive
too.
for it, right? Yeah.
Or strives for it. I mean, you know, I would say many who have reviewed his wines would say it's pretty damn good. But I just wonder
he's probably still striving. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I guess that's also the point I have with Warren is that in his 90s, he was still speaking as somebody who was in their 20s. You know, like when you're on fire and you feel this fire in your belly and you have to see your vision come to fruition. This guy won the Judgment of Paris, sold his winery for a buttload of money, owns some of the greatest properties in Napa through the real hard work it takes to be able to accumulate those things. And yet he didn't act like he was even halfway there. You know, it's interesting. But I can tell talking to you, Steve, I mean, you have a innate, I wouldn't say fear. I think respect is the right term. But I have a couple teachers and I have a particular coach that I had in sports that I would describe the same way as him, that I am, during the process, I was very afraid of them, you know? But having gone through that process, I am who I am because of them. And I just wonder if people get to do that anymore, you know? Are there any Warrens left?
I think so. You know, I think it's just, hopefully at least, I sure hope so. It's different people have different styles, right? There is a responsibility to teach when you're in an industry that is apprenticeship based, right? Wine is apprenticeship based. You can't learn winemaking from a book. You have to learn it from people that do it. That's just how it works. And it's, always been that way. So different people have different teaching styles, but that sense of teaching is baked into our profession. And I think it's still there. I mean, there's a lot of places that they just want to get labor from their interns, but the good places are teaching their interns and teaching their employees and providing opportunity for them. And, and it doesn't end I still get calls from people that were interns with me 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Maybe I can introduce into someone, there's a little connection somewhere. And, that's just part of what this responsibility is, because you were helped. And so you have to, because Warren would always tell stories about what he learned from Andrei Chelyshev. I mean, Andrei Chelyshev really mentored Warren big time. So Warren would pass along the stuff that he learned from Andrei. He'd say, well, Andrei said this, or one couldn't understand, because a lot of it was trying to, he didn't like the high alcohol wines. And so a lot of our viticulture was, how can we get the ripeness, the ripe tannins that he was looking for at lower alcohols. Part of that was one of the things we talked a lot about, like late season water stress. But then on the vineyard manager side, a lot of times they don't like the vines looking water stressed. I remember Warren, saying, well, I used to put my shoes on at the Fay vineyard. I would put my shoes on, or SLV vineyard, I put my shoes on in the same place, my boots on in the same place every morning as the sun was coming up, and look at the vines. And one day, the vines were getting bigger every single day. But then one day I was worried they weren't growing any longer. And it was right at the solstice. And I said to Andrei Chelyshev, I told him that I've been watching the vines get bigger every day. And he finished my sentence and said, and now they're getting smaller. And he said, yes. And Andrei said, they're supposed to do that. They get bigger and then they get smaller. And then they're ready to harvest. And if you don't let them get smaller, they'll never be ready. That's just an example of hearing him tell that story. It's like, that's cool, man. That's like a direct conduit to Andrei Chelyshev. Here's a person that learned from that guy that's passing that on to me. But where do you think Andrei learned it? Did he figure that out on his own, or someone, passed it on to him? And so now I have to pass that on. That's just the responsibility. If you're given a nugget that you have to, if you don't pass it on, then you're greedy.
It's crazy what you're saying. You're a direct conduit to him. And this is why you're on the podcast. Exactly what you just said. I will never forget when I told you we were doing something on the Judgment of Paris, and your first response, I expected you to say, that's bullshit. The Judgment of Paris is bullshit. Who cares? I just thought as a winemaker, you'd be like, for Christ's sake, enough about this event. And instead you went the opposite. You're like, this is the most important thing. You were like, I have this house because of the Judgment of Paris. I have this property. I have this mentality. I have this. I may not know why, but because of that, and you were like, you have to talk to Warren. And I watched you pick your phone up and call him and say, I got these guys here. They've made some nice movies. You have to talk to them. You were the first person who messaged Warren. This is why you're on the podcast, Steve. The idea of passing down education and learning and competition and thinking about why you want to be the best. I see you every day with your Schioppettino and all the stuff that you're messing around with, and you're trying and you're still innovating and you're still thinking. Warren would be, and I'm sure was till his last minute, so proud of you. It's an incredible thing, and why I can't leave the wine business. I don't make wine. I drink a lot of it, that's for sure, but I don't make it. And to see somebody like you extend kind of the way he was, I want to, John, do you mind playing the last clip, the completeness of wine and sort of his vision in wine and how to achieve that?
As you look at the grapes and you say to yourself, I have a vision for what these grapes should become. Because winemaking is vision as much as it's material. But you have to listen to the grape. Where are these grapes going? What is the best thing that they can become? And you try to get that. Because without that, you're leaving something behind. If you don't have that aspiration, then you're going to make ordinary wine. It's wonderful, daily beverage, but it doesn't lift your spirit. It doesn't do the kind of thing that's something that's complete as an experience, as an aesthetic experience. It tells something to your soul, completeness. You don't experience a lot of completeness in your life. It's not complete. It ends, for example. Exposure to completeness is limited. So if you could do that in a beverage, if you could do that with wine to show completeness, you give the opportunity for that experience to make a difference to that person who drinks it. And that's good.
I mean, think about it. He can say what he just said and end it with, it's good.
Yeah.
There's nobody who can, it's like a Hemingway kind of thing. You can say something so deep and end it with, it's good, huh?
That's good.
This is a tough question. And I don't mean to, I know that this is an emotional one for you, but I mean, what have we lost with Warren passing? Napa is changing. It's changed. The Napa that Warren was a part of in the early 70s, in the late 70s, and the early 80s is not the same Napa.
Yeah, well, luckily for us, he put a lot of energy towards sharing a lot of his philosophies. So we have access to that. And there's some really, like, there's some good stuff from him on like the oral history at the St. Helena Library. And there's the filming that you did that people are going to be able to, like that little piece there. How inspirational is that, right? If you're a winemaker or any craftsperson, they say you're making ceramics, the idea of completeness. I mean, it's just an inspirational message that he just shared for some people that are trying to do something, right? Make films. There's how, right? How can that not resonate with you in terms of with your filmmaking, to think about that and you think, I don't know if you've ever thought about that, the idea of completeness, but now that that's there, probably there's a lot to think about there so a lot of this is accessible for people now. He shared a lot of that stuff. So I kind of feel like, we lost a lot. It's not a tragedy because, he managed to have a long life and share so much stuff during that life. A week before he passed, he asked my partner Garrett to send a video of the work going on in the vineyard because he wanted to make sure that everything was being done properly. But, he really cared.
I want to thank you so much for talking about Warren. It's tough to condense somebody who had a career like him. When you live into your 90s and you are part of a seminal time of a region or a time period or a movement, he was kind of all of those things. He doesn't fit a mold. There is no mold like Warren Winiarski. There's nobody like him anymore. I remember when we reached out to him, you were the first person, like I said, to reach out to him. We reached out to him and he said, he said to us, he wanted to talk to me. He said, who's the director going to make this film? And so he got on the phone with me and he said, is it going to be better than Bottle Shock? And I said, well, it's a documentary. I don't know if it's going to be. And he goes, is it going to be better? And then I was like, my wife's like elbowing me in the ribs. Yes. And I'm like, yes, sir. It's going to be better. He goes, good. Then you can talk to me. I'll never forget this whole, like, I'm trying to like walk around his question. And my wife is like, say yes. So
I remember there was something that was going on when they were doing that movie. And it was like, they were talking at the winery, like Tom Hanks was going to play Warren or something.
Actually, to be honest, that would have been amazing. I would love to see Tom Hanks in that, like 10 years ago, play Warren Winiarski in the Judgment in Paris film.
Yeah, right. But what I heard was that Warren didn't agree with how the story was being told and wouldn't let them use his name or his role in it.
I have heard that too.
That's what I heard.
We may or may not have something about that in the series coming. No spoilers. Anyways, Steve, I want to thank you so much. And it's I know this was an emotional question when I asked you to talk about Warren. He just passed away. But it means a lot that you took your time. There's nobody like him. I said earlier, there are like legends in a field, and then there are people who inspire the legends in a field. And he was kind of that guy.
I can't wait to see, because these clips were just so amazing. And I was so hit when you just played these 3 different clips. I cannot wait to see the interview with him. It's going to be insane.
Yeah, if you're listening to this on the podcast, I would say you can watch this on Som TV. It's a whole new episode, with a lot of footage to watch what we're talking about. Steve, it means a lot to all of you who listen to the Som TV podcast. It means the world to us. Leave a great review if you love the podcast, and think long and hard about the profession you're in and the people who built it. If you truly love what you do for work, subscribe to Som TV. We have lots on the Judgment of Paris. You can watch a lot of the bottles being opened. But Warren, one of the architects of Napa, really shows. Have a glass of something for Warren. Do a cheers. This guy was the guy. Everybody be safe. We'll talk soon.